Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. I'm really excited to dive right into today's topic with you. We're looking at a virus that's very real, very present, and literally right in our backyards, the Hanta virus, or, just hantavirus for short. Today we're totally demystifying this thing. We're going to break down the hardcore molecular science, look at the real-world risks, and, maybe most importantly, give you the exact actionable steps you need to keep yourself and your family perfectly safe. Let's get into it.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with number 1, a deadly global threat. 2, the toll on the body. 3, the race for a vaccine. And finally 4, how to protect yourself.
Okay, Section 1, a deadly global threat, recent outbreaks.
So, to really grasp why we're talking about this right now, we just have to look at the recent news. This is absolutely not some dusty virus from the history books. It is an active, evolving threat. Just look at what went down on that Atlantic cruise ship recently. The World Health Organization actually had to investigate a suspected hantavirus outbreak right there on the water. Tragically, 3 people lost their lives. Lab testing confirmed at least 1 case, there were 5 other suspected cases, and another passenger ended up fighting for their life in an intensive care unit in South Africa. It's a massive wake-up call, right? As global travel expands, these viruses just hitch a ride, turning what used to be isolated local hazards into full-blown international health emergencies.
Now, what's really wild about this virus is that it manifests completely differently depending on where you happen to live. It basically causes 2 distinct syndromes. Over in Asia and Europe, we mostly see HFRS, that's hemorrhagic fever, with renal syndrome. It hits the kidneys really hard, and it has a mortality rate of anywhere from 0.1% up to about 15%. But if you look at the Americas, the virus takes a totally different and honestly a much more lethal path. It causes HPS, or hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This aggressive variant rapidly floods the lungs with fluid, and get this, it carries an absolutely staggering mortality rate of up to 50%. 50%! You could literally be perfectly healthy 1 week and fighting for your next breath a few days later.
And if we trace the documented infections from the 1910s all the way up to the 2000s and 2022s, it becomes super clear how this virus has just stepped right out of the shadows. A century ago, documented cases were incredibly rare, mostly isolated to parts of Russia, and later we saw some during the Korean War. But as time marches on, the outbreaks just explode across the map. We're talking the Americas in the 90s, widespread European and Asian outbreaks in the 2000s, and recent clusters popping up in Africa and the Middle East. It's a really clear story of a pathogen aggressively expanding its geographic footprint.
Let's zoom way in for a second and look at the microscopic level, because understanding the structure is basically the key to stopping it. We're looking at the orthohantavirus virion. It's an envelope virus, and it's got a 3-part RNA genome. First, you've got the small, or S segment. This encodes the nucleocapsid protein, which is basically the heavily armored shell protecting its genetic material. Then you have the medium, or M segment. That one creates the surface glycoproteins GN and GC. Think of these like a set of lockpicks the virus uses to break into human cells. And finally, the large, or L segment. This codes for the RNA polymerase, which is essentially the engine that drives the virus's ability to replicate itself. Understanding this exact machinery is absolutely crucial for scientists trying to figure out how to dismantle it.
Moving right along to Section 2, the toll on the body, life after infection.
So, what actually happens if you're exposed, get really sick, but luckily survive? Well, the initial infection is brutal, but the story definitely doesn't end when you leave the hospital. For the longest time, we just didn't know much about the long-term effects. But then, a massive 5-year longitudinal study tracked 33 survivors of acute hantavirus. Dr. Diane Goad, a lead researcher on the project, was just floored by the lingering damage they found. They discovered high rates of proteinuria, which is excess protein in the urine and a huge red flag for kidney disease. In her own words, finding this was an astounding number in young, relatively healthy people. This virus clearly leaves scars long after that initial fever breaks.
Digging a little deeper into the data from that same 5-year study, the physical toll is honestly pretty shocking. A full 90%, so 9 out of 10 survivors, reported lingering fatigue and a decreased ability to exercise half a decade later. And when researchers actually tested their lungs, they found a really distinct triad of abnormalities. 79% had decreased small airway flow, and 76% showed increased residual volume. It means the actual physical capacity of their lungs was permanently altered.
To really put a human face on those numbers, let's think about this. 2 miles a day. That was the absolute maximum walking distance a high school wrestling coach could manage 5 whole years after his hantavirus infection. Now, before the virus,
This guy was running 5 miles a day every single day without even breaking a sweat. That massive drop in his quality of life and sheer physical capability is just a stark reminder of why we really need to focus on prevention.
Which brings us to Section 3, the race for a vaccine, fighting back.
With a mortality rate jumping up to 50% and long-term consequences this rough, how exactly is the scientific community fighting back? Well, first we have to understand how our immune system naturally reacts to the virus. When you're infected, your body's defense kicks in across 2 phases. First, you get this really sharp spike in antibodies. That's your body's frantic emergency response. After that, a secondary antibody response rises up and actually stays elevated for the long haul, sometimes literally for decades, giving you long-term protection. The massive puzzle for vaccine developers is figuring out how to create a shot that perfectly mimics that complex, sustained immune response without, actually exposing the patient to the deadly virus itself.
So scientists worldwide are currently attacking this from 5 major angles. First up, we have inactivated vaccines. Places like South Korea and China have actually been using inactivated vaccines like Hanta for years, and it's brought their infection numbers way down. But science is always pushing further, right? Researchers are also testing viral vector vaccines that use a harmless virus as a delivery truck, virus-like particles that mimic the virus's shape but are completely hollow inside, subunit vaccines that just use specific proteins, and of course those cutting-edge nucleic acid vaccines, your DNA and mRNA tech. Those last ones hold incredible promise because they can be developed and adapted so rapidly.
Okay, let's get to the really practical stuff. Section 4. How to protect yourself. Actionable steps.
Since we don't have a universally approved vaccine everywhere just yet, your absolute best line of defense is simply your own behavior. We're going to walk through the gold standard cleanup guidelines from the CDC. But before you even think about grabbing a broom to clean out that dusty shed or the cabin out back, you have to understand one absolutely critical word: aerosolized. Hantavirus primarily spreads when we breathe in contaminated air. So the absolute biggest, most dangerous mistake you can make is vacuuming or sweeping up dry mouse droppings. If you sweep, you literally launch the virus straight into the air as an invisible dust directly into your lungs. Just don't do it.
So how do you actually clean it safely? You have to use liquid. Specifically, you want to use the CDC's Safe Cleaning Mix. That's 1.5 cups of standard household bleach mixed into 1 gallon of water. Alternatively, you can use a commercial EPA-registered household disinfectant. That works too. But please, make sure you are wearing rubber or plastic gloves before you even start mixing anything up.
All right, once you've got your bleach solution and your gloves on, you're going to follow this exact 4-step sequence. First, generously spray the droppings until they are very, very wet. I mean it, do not skimp on the spray here. Second, and this is the step everyone wants to rush, you have to let it soak for a full 5 minutes. The bleach needs that exact amount of time to literally tear the virus apart. Third, wipe it all up using paper towels. And fourth, toss those towels into a covered, double-bagged garbage can.
Now, what if you're dealing with dead rodents in snap traps? The CDC says those traditional wooden snap traps can totally be safely reused, but you've got to be careful. While wearing your gloves, do not pry them out dry. Instead, submerge the entire trap, rodent, wood, and all, into a bucket of your disinfectant mix for 5 full minutes. Only after that soak should you release the rodent into a double bag, rinse off the trap to kill the bleach scent, and let it dry out. This doesn't just protect you from the virus, it also kills any nasty, disease-carrying fleas that might be hitching a ride.
Finally, one thing people always forget about: our cars. Vehicles that have been sitting idle in a driveway or out in a barn are prime real estate for rodents. If a car hasn't been used in a while, never ever just jump in and crank the AC. First, you need to open all the doors, pop the hood, and open the trunk. Let the entire interior and engine compartment air out in a well-ventilated space for 20 solid minutes before you even start poking around looking for chewed wires or nests.
Wow, okay, we've covered a ton of ground today, right? From the microscopic RNA structure of the virus to the exact ratio of household bleach you need under your sink. But I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought. As climate change, human encroachment, and deforestation rapidly alter our environments, rodent populations are surging and they're moving much closer to where we live. The global map is shifting right before our eyes. So the big question is, as this virus steps further out of the shadows, are we, both as individuals and as a global society, truly prepared for what's next? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe, follow those protocols, and keep learning.